Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. You can call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391, get any updates to our forecast through that means, or check out any watches, warnings, advisories that we have out for your area. You can also go to our website at weather.gov/Alaska, check out any updates to the forecast through that means as well, or email us at the address on the bottom of the screen. Starting off, we'll take a quick look at the hazards that we do have out for this state. We're going to start off in southeast Alaska. In the Haines area, so for the Haines Highway and areas to the west of Haines, we do have a winter weather advisory for snow still in effect until 6 p.m. this evening. However, we are expecting that snow to start diminishing there as we get closer towards 6 p.m. And then up a little bit further to the north on the Klondike Highway, you have a winter storm warning out for heavy snow that is also going to drop off here around 6 p.m. this evening. Moving a little bit to the west, we have in the Susitna Valley around Willow and the Willow Creek area, we do have a flood advisory that is in effect now until 2:30 p.m. on Tuesday. As we move up to the north, we'll start off here on the Brooks Range. All along the southern part of the Brooks Range, we do have wind chill advisories in effect. Coldest to the west, where we are going to get down to around -55. And then as we move to areas further to the east, around -45 there. However, as we move out here to those western locations, those are for areas north of Ambler and north of Noatak. So those wind chill advisories are all going to be out from 6 p.m. this evening until 6 p.m. on Tuesday. Taking us down a little bit further to the south in the Kuskokwim Delta area, another wind chill advisory in effect. That one is going to be out until 11 p.m. on Tuesday until 7 p.m. on Wednesday. That is for temperatures dropping down to as low as 50 below. As we move out over the central Aleutian Islands, we will have a blowing snow advisory in effect there from 9 a.m. on Tuesday until 6 p.m. on Tuesday. Taking a look at what's causing all of this, we have multiple low pressure systems moving throughout the area. Again, we'll start off in southeast Alaska. We do have a low that's in the northern part of the Gulf that's been pushing this system through this Panhandle area, and you can see where all of the heavier precipitation was pushing through there, and it's starting to clear up behind that, so we are going to start to see a diminishment in the snowfall up by the Haines area. We have another low that is pushing across the Alaska Peninsula, bringing some snow to those areas, and a third system to the south that's skirting south of Kodiak Island, moving out into the Gulf of Alaska. And as we step way further out to the west, we will see by the western Aleutian Islands the cloud cover heading that way from another system approaching from the North Pacific, and that will be the system that brings the blowing snow conditions eventually to the central Aleutian Islands. Then as we look out for the remainder of today's weather, right now that system is warm enough to be primarily rain, still yet to approach the Aleutian Islands. Out over the central part of the Bering Sea, we do have some snow showers over the area. That is following behind a frontal system that we have with the low that's around the Alaska Peninsula. Some colder air behind that, bringing a lot of snow to the Alaska Peninsula and areas out by Kodiak Island. However, a little bit warmer there, going to expect to see some rain for the most part for Kodiak. With our low in the northern part of the Gulf of Alaska, we do have some snow for some of south central Alaska, heaviest for areas along the North Gulf Coast, becoming more showery as we push to areas further inland. And we are going to have some lingering snow showers for areas of the central and eastern part of the interior as well. Up along the Arctic coastline, some lighter snow showers up there, and starting to mix with fog as we get to areas further to the west. Dropping us down all the way into the Panhandle area, we have still quite a bit of snow in the more interior locations in those inside waters, but as we drop down closer towards the Gulf, we are expecting that to be a little bit warmer and starting to mix with rain, especially in the lower lying areas right by the water. As we move into tonight, we are going to have some more warm air pushing into the Panhandle area, continuing to push that rain line further to the north, especially again for those areas closer to the water in those low-lying areas. However, as the more interior locations, especially as we get by Juneau and to the northwest towards Haines and Skagway, expecting that to stay as snow. Along the North Gulf Coast, primarily snow with some areas right by the Gulf that could be mixing with rain. Down into the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island, expecting to see rain in the colder air following the low that's moving into the northern part of the Gulf of Alaska. Expecting to see snow showers throughout south central and into the interior, especially as we get up into the upper Yukon Valley. However, along the Arctic coastline, high pressure building and dominating the area. Going to have some lingering fog, but should have moved out all of these snow showers. As we move down into the Bering Sea, we are going to see some snow showers, especially in the northern locations, St. Lawrence Island, not quite making it down to the Pribilof Islands tonight. And then in the northerly flow in the Alaska Peninsula, expecting to see some snow showers, especially on the Bering side of the peninsula. And our system is pushing in from the west, is now going to bring some snow to the central Aleutian Islands and out to the western Aleutian Islands. Not as much wind as you can see the tightly wrapped system that we have approaching the central Aleutian Islands. So as we move into Tuesday, you can really see where the stronger winds are and why we'll have those blowing snow conditions on Tuesday. Some lingering snow showers throughout the remainder of the Aleutian Islands and Bering Sea, and starting to push the snow line towards the Alaska Peninsula as well there on Tuesday. We'll continue to push more and more into the area as we move throughout the day on Tuesday. West coast of Alaska should be pretty clear, but as we get by our system by Kenai Peninsula, we are going to see some snow in all of those locations, pushing up into the interior and out to the eastern parts of the interior as well. High pressure will continue to dominate the Arctic coastline, however, keeping that snow well to the south. As we move down into the Panhandle area, going to see lingering snow showers, especially in the northern locations, with some lighter precipitation further to the south, and starting to mix with rain again as we get into those warmer areas by the Gulf of Alaska. For Wednesday, system pushing in some more warm air, bringing in heavier precipitation, pushing the rain further into the inside waters. However, many of the higher elevations and areas further inland are going to see primarily snow, especially as we get to areas by Haines and Skagway. Along the North Gulf Coast, going to continue to see primarily snow. Again, it could mix with rain as we get right by the Gulf waters. And then as we move into the South Central, going to see some snow showers there. And some areas of the southern and eastern part of the interior are going to see some snow. As we move out to the west, we are going to see some snow all the way along the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutian Islands, eastern Bering Sea as well, up to the Tin City area through St. Lawrence Island, and out through the central Bering as well. And another system coming in towards the western Aleutian Islands, a little bit warmer. Going to see a transition from snow to rain throughout the day on Wednesday as that system moves in. Taking a look at our temperatures now, we'll start off out by the Bering and Aleutians. We do have temperatures dropping down to below or at 30 degrees for Tuesday morning. For the Pribilof Islands, dropping down to 21 degrees. And as we move into the YK Delta area, or the Bristol Bay area rather, getting into the single digits there, dropping well below zero for the YK Delta area, including the Seward Peninsula, with Nome getting down to -12 for Tuesday morning. Dropping into the -20s as we get up along the Arctic coastline, with Dead Horse a little bit colder there, down to -30. And as we move to Arctic Village, down to -41 degrees for Tuesday morning. Other places throughout the interior warmer as we get further to the south, but staying below zero. As we move into south central Alaska, primarily in the teens for interior locations, except for the Glen Allen area, dropping down to -3 there. And then right around freezing for areas around Prince William Sound. As we move into the Panhandle area, dropping down to right around freezing there as well. But as we move into Tuesday afternoon, getting up to around 40 degrees for southern locations, only getting up to around 35 for Haines. Yakutat at 40 degrees Tuesday afternoon. For south central Alaska, getting into the 20s for a lot of the more interior locations. However, just getting up into the single digits for the Copper River Basin, but well above freezing as we get to places along Prince William Sound and down into Kodiak, 35 degrees expected high there. Staying below zero for most places in the interior, with Fairbanks getting up to -10 degrees. In the Brooks Range, we're going to stay in the -20s for the most part. Arctic Village still staying pretty cold there, -40 degrees for an expected high on Tuesday afternoon. Along the Arctic coastline, primarily in the -20s, however, Utqiagvik getting up to -18 for Tuesday afternoon. Along the west coast of the state, around the Seward Peninsula, right around -10, and then for Gamble area getting up to 13 degrees above zero. As we move down into the YK Delta area, single digits but in the negatives. And then as we move into the Bristol Bay area, a lot of single digits there as well, but going to be above zero. Down in the Alaska Peninsula, getting right above freezing for the most part. Cold Bay staying a little bit colder, they're only getting up to 31 degrees. Central Aleutians, 35 for Atka and 36 for Adak, 32 out there by Shemya. Taking us to Wednesday morning, we are going to have temperatures dropping just below freezing for the Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula. However, getting a little bit colder now on Wednesday morning. For Christmas morning, we are going to get into the negatives for the Bristol Bay area. And then we're going to get around -20 for much of the YK Delta area. Getting just above -20 for the Seward Peninsula area, -18 for Nome, -24 for Kotzebue rather, a little bit colder there. Up along the Arctic coastline, -20s for the most part. Dead Horse getting down to -41, and Arctic Village all the way down to -46. Taking us into the interior, the minus teens and the positive teens as we drop down to south central Alaska, and then down around freezing for much of the Panhandle. So move into the afternoon, getting up into the mid-30s for much of the Panhandle, into the 20s and 30s as we get closer to the Gulf of Alaska for south central Alaska, staying well below zero for the interior up along the Arctic coastline as well, and for the west coast of Alaska. We are going to get a little bit warmer there for the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Islands, getting right about freezing. We'll be back shortly with the aviation section.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a quick look at our flying weather. Out over the Bering Sea, we have some widespread MVFR conditions going down into the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, with an area of IFR just to the south of the Aleutians, with a low approaching from the south. As we look over mainland Alaska, to include the Alaska Peninsula, with some IFR conditions there. MVFR conditions through much of the central and southern part of mainland Alaska, with some isolated areas of IFR out over eastern parts of the southwest part of the state, getting up into the Alaska range, and then the southern portions of the Kenai Peninsula as well. And then down in the Panhandle area, widespread IFR conditions expected on Tuesday morning. And as we move into Tuesday afternoon, some of those IFR conditions are going to clear up to be more marginal. However, areas to the north are going to be still in those IFR conditions. Out over southern Alaska, widespread IFR conditions as we have a system moving up from the south. And then as we move up to the Arctic coastline and areas of the northern parts of the interior, some VFR conditions expected there. Down in the Bering Sea, MVFR conditions are expected until we get down into the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, where we are expecting some IFR conditions. On Wednesday morning, MVFR conditions remaining over much of the central Bering Sea, central Aleutians as well. However, the IFR conditions have pushed off to the east, more towards the Alaska Peninsula. So look over mainland Alaska in the interior, eastern and central portions of the interior, we are expecting to see some IFR conditions. Those IFR conditions dipping down into the Anchorage Bowl area as well. And then along the North Gulf Coast, we are going to expect some IFR conditions extending into the northern portions of the Panhandle. Central locations of the Panhandle are expected to be MVFR, with VFR conditions expected further to the south. Then Wednesday afternoon, MVFR conditions extending all throughout the Panhandle area, where we have IFR conditions extending through the central and northern portions. IFR conditions through much of the North Gulf Coast as well, especially around the Prince William Sound area. Then MVFR conditions throughout to the north of the rest of South Central, with the exception of the Susitna Valley. So we move up into the northern locations in the interior and along the North Slope coast, we do have MVFR conditions with some IFR conditions mixed in as we push out further to the east. Down in the Bering Sea, widespread MVFR conditions are expected Wednesday afternoon, and that does include much of the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula, with the exception of the central Aleutian Islands, should remain VFR in the afternoon on Wednesday. Taking us through the passes, AKwx Pass will be MVFR and improved to VFR as we move into the afternoon, as well as Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill should both be IFR throughout the day on Tuesday. Then as we move into Rainy Pass, MVFR conditions dropping down to IFR, as well as at Windy Pass. Isabel Pass also marginal, dropping down to IFR conditions in the afternoon. Mentasta should be MVFR throughout the day. And Tenita Pass will start off MVFR, drop down to IFR, as well as at Portage. So we move out over to Chilkoot and White, going to be IFR conditions all day on Tuesday. So look at our freezing level, surface freezing line, hugs to the more interior locations along the Panhandle, then along the North Gulf Coast, extending out through Shelikof Strait, then out into the southern portions of the Bering. A little bit of warmer area to the south of the central Aleutian Islands coming up with that next system. Our icing we do have below 4,000 feet for much of the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, extending up towards the Pribilof Islands as well. And as we look out over the interior, below 4,000 feet in northern locations, so drop down to south central Alaska between 5,000 and 10,000 feet. Then out over the Panhandle below 4,000 feet is expected. For our jet stream to the southern areas of the Panhandle, we do have a southerly component of the jet, 90 knots there, exiting out to the northeast. Then out over the northeastern part of the state, 60 knots out of a westerly direction. Then out over southwest Alaska, 95 knot jet and out of a northwesterly direction. 9,000-foot winds rotating around our low is going to be our area of strongest winds on the southern side of that low. Up to as high as 85 knots are expected, dropping down as we get out over the Bering Sea. Flow over much of the state is going to be out of a southwesterly direction, 20 to 30 knots, highest as we get closer towards Yakutat. and then a northerly component as we get up along the Arctic coastline, 20 to 30 knots expected there, down in the 20s along the west coast out of that northerly direction. Down to 3,000 feet, circulation around our low, pretty light until we get to the western locations around 25 knots there, continuing that northerly flow around 25 knots down the west coast of the state. Southwesterly flow out over the Panhandle, 15 to 20 knots expected there at 3,000 feet. And as we look, our strongest winds again are low near the Central Aleutian Islands, flow around that 50 to 55 knots, getting as high as 75 knots on the southern side of that low. Northeasterly flow, 20 to 25 knots over the rest of the Bering. As we look at our turbulence, as expected with the with the winds around the low, we are expecting turbulence all along the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula below 5,000 feet there, and then some portions to the north by Point Hope area below 4,000 feet.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from Dehne and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by AKwx to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and Dehne's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that they could that would be easier to travel with, you know, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state.
Which you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy. And it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. Computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these 2-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains. where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math in many different locations around Alaska then. This would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the, it's like fly paper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine portion of the forecast. We'll start off with a quick look at our ice edge. We do have ice pushing into the Bering Strait area, and with strong northerly winds lasting the next couple of days, we do expect that ice to push further to the south, filling in more open water locations to the north, but pushing through the Bering Strait, including Diomede Island. And as we move down along the coast, we do have ice pushing into around Nunavik Island area and down in Bristol Bay. And as we do have those colder temperatures later in this week, we do expect some ice to start to form in the Cook Inlet area as well. Taking a look now at the main part of our marine forecast starting in southeast Alaska. We do have south to southeast winds all throughout the Panhandle area, 15 to 20 knots out over the Gulf, 10 to 20 knots for the inside waters, with the strongest further to the south. And we have seas getting as high as 19 feet out in the Gulf. Then on Wednesday, we do have primarily southerly winds, strongest again out in the Gulf, up to as high as 45 knots, with seas getting up to as high as 22 feet. The highest seas are further to the north. And then in the inside waters, southeasterly flow 30 to 35 knots for many of the central and southern locations. And then as we get further up to the north, dropping down to around 15 knots. For Tuesday, for south central Alaska, we have primarily southerly flow throughout much of the Gulf and into Prince William Sound area, around 25 to 30 knots there, becoming more westerly as we get out towards the Cook Inlet area and around the Barren Islands, 30 to 35 knots around the Barren Islands, 25 knots in the southern portions of Cook Inlet. Then as we move into Wednesday, becoming more northerly, 25 knots in the northern parts of Cook Inlet, getting up to as high as 40 knots as we approach the Barren Islands. Out over the Gulf of Alaska, changing to be more easterly, 35 to 40 knots in the western locations, getting up to as high as 50 knots in the barrier jet, southeasterly direction heading towards Prince William Sound. In Prince William Sound, northeasterly, 30 knots there. For the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, kind of split flow here around Kodiak Island and near Bristol Bay, westerly flow around 30 knots. And as we get closer towards Sandpoint and Cold Bay area, easterly flow 30 to 35 knots. Into Wednesday, flow becoming more north to northwesterly, around 40 knots for most locations, a little bit weaker to the east of Kodiak Island, only around 25 knots there. Seas as high as 23 feet, and those are the highest on the Pacific side. As we move into the Aleutian chain, we do have primarily easterly flow, 40 to 45 knots out over the eastern Aleutian Islands, becoming more northerly as we push off to the west, around 45 knots there, diminishing to around 25 knots for the western Aleutian Islands. Seas getting as high as 22 feet south of the central Aleutians. Then on Wednesday, flow becoming easterly for the western Aleutian Islands, 30 to 40 knots there, more northerly as we push out to the east, getting as high as 40 knots on the Bering side of the eastern Aleutian Islands and 45 knots on the Pacific side of the eastern Aleutians. Seas as high as 23 feet, highest also south of the eastern Aleutian Islands. Then as we move to the west coast of the state, primarily northerly flow, picking up to as high as 30 knots as we get closer to the Pribilof Islands, around 20 knots for the most part as we move up north to the more northern locations along the coast. Then on Wednesday, sticking to that northerly direction, as high as 35 knots south of Nunavik Island, with seas around 10 feet for those southern locations down by the Pribilof Islands as well. Along the Arctic coastline, primarily ice covered and northerly flow, weak along the Arctic coastline, getting stronger as we get along the west coast of the state up to as high as 30 knots. That's what's going to help drive the ice edge further to the south through the Bering Strait area. On Wednesday, continuing to see that northerly direction, 25 knots around the Bering Strait again, helping to push that ice further to the south, and then pretty light up around 5 to 10 knots along the Arctic coastline. As we look for the remainder of tonight, we will see some low pressure system out over the northern part of the Gulf, bringing in some warmer flow towards the Panhandle area, starting to mix in some rain for southern locations around the Panhandle. Snow primarily to more inland locations, especially as we get up by the Haines and Skagway areas. And along the North Gulf Coast, we are going to continue to see snow for locations out by Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island as well. Snow extending out over much of the south central Alaska into the interior. Along the Arctic coastline, however, high pressure going to dominate, going to keep some fog up there. And we will have some wind chill conditions along the Arctic, or along the southern Brooks Range rather. That's going to be from 6 p.m. this evening until 6 p.m. on Tuesday. And then as we move down the west coast, we are going to have some other wind chill conditions for the Kuskokwim Delta area. However, that's not going to start until 11 p.m. on Tuesday, lasting until 7 p.m. on Wednesday. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.